Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Dave, you ever seen The Big Lebowski? That movie? It's I think, is it Jeff Bridges? There's a brother there too, right? I believe. I think Beau Bridges. Yeah, there's two, but I think it's Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, it is Jeff Bridges in Big Lebowski. It's a cult classic.
It is a cult classic. It's one of my favorite movies. And sometimes our world has become so nihilistic. And I mean, there's all kinds of, like, I don't mean to diminish this, and yet there's part of my weird juvenile brain is always sitting back there hearing those guys in The Big Lebowski going, Lebowski, we're nihilists. We believe in nothing. We'll come back and cut off your Johnson. I sometimes think like that's our world today, man, dealing with a bunch of Lebowskiite nihilists.
Well, the interesting part about that is John Goodman turning to Steve Buscemi.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a cast, right? And the best actor in the entire movie might play the smallest role, and that's Sam Elliott. I mean, for career, I'll take Sam Elliott over everybody.
I think in every scene, right, he's sitting at the bar at the bowling alley, and he engages Lebowski here and there.
He's sort of the voice of reason and rationality to this whole thing, which is perfect for Sam Elliott, especially with that voice. But the funny part was John Goodman turning to Steve Buscemi, named Donnie in the movie. And he says, don't worry, Donnie, they're nihilists. They're harmless. they don't follow through on anything. And you start to think about all of the things that all of the nihilists in our world, harmless, they're not going to physically come and hurt you or I, but they're still doing a whole lot of damage to our world.
I didn't expect us to go down this Lebowski theme, but it's so fitting. There's another scene where the nihilists are floating in the pool on some little floaties, right? And someone makes this comment about, they're nihilists, and Lebowski says, God, that must be exhausting. and there's a lot of truth to that, right? The nihilists among us, on the one hand, they say, well, there's no truth. Who's to say what's right and wrong? This nihilistic foundation. And yet they're the greatest busybodies in our world today. They want to be involved in your business and tell you what you can do with your property and how to educate your kids and what medicines you're going to take and not, right? Every aspect of your life. So it turns out being a nihilist today really is exhausting.
I'm starting to try to process what it would look like to remake Big Lebowski today with social media involved, right? Because that's all nihilists like to do now is so the scenes where they're trying to get the girl back, give us the girl Lebowski,
right?
Or give us the money Lebowski. Give us the money. Are they going to be sending him tweets on Twitter? Hey, give us the money Lebowski. Where's the money Lebowski? That whole movie could be redone in social media.
Instead,
and be
they
very
took what was it? No, not a mongoose. What's that little critter? They throw it in the bathtub with him.
I forgot about that scene.
Is it a ferret? It might be a ferret.
It's a ferret. It is a ferret. You're absolutely right.
They throw the ferret in the bathtub with Lebowski. Okay, so for our members who have not seen The Big Lebowski, if you want something very proper that is inculcating and inspiring virtue, do not go watch The Big Lebowski. But if you're looking for something that's just silly and funny, it's hard to go wrong. I would recommend having a drink while you watch the movie. Yeah.
It's certainly a cult classic. I've seen it a fair share of times. Wow, I don't even know where to go from that.
Well, it is also kind of fitting. You have these German, they speak with this German accent, these German nihilists in the movie. They would be on the top A list for the new 87,000 bureaucrats that the IRS is looking to employ.
Although I'm not sure they're willing to carry the guns that the IRS is expected to carry the guns and be ready and willing to use.
That's right.
The other interesting part in that whole equation that I didn't really put together, you have these German nihilists, and John Goodman is the one really going after them. He's the aggressor when it comes to them all the time.
Yeah.
He's the not really, but became a Jew. Right.
Yeah.
So you have John Goodman,
he says in there, right? He is converted. Yes.
I'm Shomer Shabbos.
Right.
I don't bowl on Saturday. Don't roll on Saturday.
That's right.
So it's a whole, for a woman he was not actually married to. I guess we're ruining the movie for everybody who hasn't seen it, but go watch Big Lebowski.
It's fantastic. Well, last time, Dave, we had ended sort of a recap of where we were, and we were gonna pick this back up. We were raising the question of number one. We were talking about, given where we are today, are we at a moment in time where it is fitting and proper and perhaps necessary that we talk to children, young Americans, and point out that it's shameful and embarrassing and bad to aspire to go work for the government. And we put this in the context of, traditionally, historically, it's very common for school kids to look up to firefighters or police officers and think someday I want to do that.
Teachers.
But that was before this gigantic administrative swamp has come to entangle itself in every aspect of our lives. Do we want more government employees, more government bureaucrats today or not? We were also pointing out, there's an interesting question about many of those jobs don't pay well. You're not going to get rich being not from the salary of a firefighter or a public school teacher or a police officer. And so to compensate for that, those in government, push this narrative that there's something really noble about those positions to help try to attract people. And we had wrapped up sort of on this question of what is it people really do value? They say, for example, that they really value education. Many people do. They'll say, oh, education is really, really important, but they don't want to pay. Many millions of Americans don't want to pay for the education for their own children.
Right.
They want someone else to pay for their local schools. When it comes to things like college and graduate school, many people don't want to pay for it themselves. It's why they have these big student loans, and they're saying, we don't think we should have to pay those student loans back. We want somebody else to pay. And of course, there's a political class that's happy to indulge them right now.
Right.
That's sort of the big dominating story right now is student loan forgiveness, which really means student loan transference, right?
Sure.
You're transferring it to other people.
And I want to come back to that, but I want to talk about the noble aspect of government work for a minute, because it's actually, we're seeing the evidence of this right now. There are reports already that the IRS is going to have a very difficult time finding people to work in those jobs, right? There is already a growing concern among the political class, among the bureaucratic class, that they are not going to be able to find 87,000 people to go work as an IRS agent. Why? Because never in our history have we said being an IRS agent is a noble job. I mean, who has ever gone out and said,
right,
man, I aspire to be an IRS agent one day.
To be a tax collector.
Right. To be a tax collector. I want to go make people's lives miserable.
Yeah.
And dig through their personal finances and find reasons to take money from them to give back to the government.
I want to inject a little fact that came across my desk just recently. So it would be bad enough if IRS agents were spending all their time taking other people's money and collecting taxes. It turns out that's not all that they do. As of right now, before this new wave of hiring happens, there are about 78,000 employees within the IRS. So that 87,000 number, I mean, what that really means is the IRS will more than double in size if they keep all the current employees and hire those new positions. But more importantly, last year, IRS employees spent 320,000 hours working for their own labor union.
Wow.
And those 320, that's combined, that those 320,000 hours of work they did, that was on the clock.
Right.
That's when they're at their job at the IRS. So when you have a question about your tax return and you call the 800 number because you have a question and you're put on hold for a long time, and then eventually someone just hangs up and you get disconnected. It's because they're doing work for their labor union. And this gets even better. You know what their labor union does? their labor union supports Democratic politicians' campaigns.
Right.
And so, number one, we pay these government employees
through tax
dollars, and then they give some of our tax dollars directly to the unions, which gives the money to the Democratic politicians. But then we're also subsidizing Democratic politicians in another way. We're paying the salaries of these IRS agents and other government employees. And what they do when they go to their office isn't the government work they're supposed to be doing. They're actually working for their union, which is busy trying to help get Democrats elected.
Right. over 98% of the time.
Yes.
So to that point, we're seeing very clearly there is this effect of we get police officers, we get firemen, we get teachers because there has been an effective campaign to make these things feel like a noble pursuit.
Right.
And when you start talking about maybe we should start shaming that, I want to draw a very clear distinction. The idea of whether you're a police officer or not, the idea of being willing to protect your own private property and to protect the private property of someone else when you see it's being violated is noble.
Agreed.
It is one of our core virtues to be self-assertive, to assert yourself when you see, hey, my friend, my next door neighbor, their property is being stolen.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to do something about it. That is noble, whether you're a police officer or not. And there are obviously police officers out there who do it for that reason. Same thing with firefighters. If your next door neighbor is their house is on fire and you have the ability to help them, you've got an extra fire extinguisher in your house and they have a kitchen fire or that you see smoke, go help them. That is a noble thing to do. It's a virtuous thing to do. Same thing with teachers. To be a teacher, look, you were a teacher. My mother, my stepfather, they were teachers. It is a noble pursuit to want to help people. The line gets drawn when you're no longer doing it for the noble pursuit, and you're doing it for the benefit of those in government. And you're not making decisions based on what is it that my community needs? What is it that I signed up for that my community needs from me, that I'm asserting myself into a situation because my community needs it. And this is something that my community would be willing to pay for. Look, I think we've all said it and we all agree. The proper purpose of government is the protection of private property, of individual private property.
Right.
And I am willing to pay something in some form, whether it's taxes or something else, to ensure if somebody was able to do that job properly, I would pay into that.
Right.
It's not even an issue, whether it's a GoFundMe campaign or taxes, as long as they were doing it properly, sure. But I want that ability to say, hey, you're not doing that right anymore. You're not doing that well anymore. I'm not participating in your scams, your scandals, your abuses anymore. And that's really where this line has become really blurred and really, really problematic. Of there was a noble pursuit of teaching children how to think well, how to reason well, how to become good human beings, good people, good.
Well, even before that, how to read,
right?
How to add, how to do like very basic things. And you're right. And here, I've said this before. It's one of those important things that needs to be repeated. Some people might hear us and think, well, Tom and Dave just hate government employees. They hate bureaucrats. They think they're all bad people. And that's not what we're saying at all.
Right.
If you take a bunch of government employees or a bunch of bureaucrats as a whole, they are just like any other group of people.
They're human beings.
Take a group of employees at private businesses, take a group of people from any section of life, and you're going to find a mix, right? Some are more honest, some are more dishonest, some are more ambitious, some are less ambitious, right? You're going to find a whole spectrum. What's different about government employees is not their personality or their character or their intelligence. It's the incentives that surround them.
Correct.
They have incentives to fail. They have incentives to not do what they're supposed to do that nobody else has. Nobody within a private business has that. No one within typical friendships or relationships has the kind of perverted incentives that teachers have or that government employees have. I'll give you one example. And this is a very well-studied, well-chronicled, well-documented phenomenon among teachers, public school teachers. It goes by different nicknames. Some people call it the 4-year burnout or the 4-year cliff or fall off. So very often, a new young teacher goes to college, gets their degree, spends some time doing some sort of practicum or practical student teaching experience, right? They get their degree, they get their certificate, so they're licensed so that they can teach, and they start off with a great bang. They're really excited. They want to teach, and they show up early, and they stay late, and they invest time, they invest their own money. Yeah. They want to make their classroom as attractive as it can be, as comfortable as it can be. They throw themselves into this job. And after a while, they start to notice that their fellow teacher, who's getting paid the exact same, leaves at 3:30 every afternoon. Every afternoon is going home, spending lots of time with their own kids or their own family, or doing whatever it is they want to do. And within that realm of public education, most school districts, their pay scale is based on a matrix. You can look at it, and there are what teachers call lanes and steps. The lanes are how many years you've been teaching.
Right.
And the steps are what degrees do you have, what certificates, what kind of credentials. And so you say, well, I've been teaching X number of years and I have my master's degree and such, and they can point right on the matrix. There's what you're going to get paid. It doesn't matter if you're a really good teacher or you're a really bad teacher. It doesn't matter if you're a really energetic, ambitious teacher or if you're a lazy teacher. What all that matters is how long have you been doing it and what degrees and credentials do you have. That's what you're going to get paid. And so those teachers who start off with a bang, who start off so excited, so energetic, right, to be teaching kids, by year 3, 4, 5, they're done with that. They say, why put in? I mean, there are exceptions, but you can see what the incentive is. There's no incentive to stay longer, to decorate your room nice, to come up with new activities or new ideas to help teach kids the kind of things you want to teach them. Just kind of do what you've always done. Right. Follow the textbook and get out of there at 3:30. You get paid the same.
Well, and think about how other teachers who are the ones who aren't putting in the time. They're the ones who are leaving right after the students leave, who are getting there right before school starts, leaving right after. They don't really care. There's a dynamic within schools where the kids feed off of the other teachers too. You've talked about this at length with me in private conversations about the degrees to which certain students are engaged in your classrooms when you were teaching in college campuses. And you had some students who were really engaged, but the vast majority of students were there because they kind of felt like they had to be. It was a credit that they had to complete, and they were just there. And you have that same thing starting at a young age. So what happens when you get a second grade teacher, let's say, who really is not energetic? That teacher doesn't care. That teacher has no interest in inspiring kids. That teacher doesn't show the kids the value of understanding math or the ability to read or helping those kids find books. This is a little tangent, but I think it's an important conversation to have. There's been a lot of studies over the last 10 years or so about the 20 years before that, about the shift in reading that was happening inside of elementary school classrooms. The vast majority of public schools were saying that boys, young boys in particular, had too much energy. They were disruptive to the class. Right? And young boys do have a lot of energy.
That was me.
That was me too, right? Like I got very easily distracted. It wasn't ADD. I don't have ADD. I don't have these problems that they just like to slap on. I just got easily distracted. I got easily bored in class. And the solution 30 years ago was we are going to start making everybody read books that are more appealing to young girls because maybe that will calm down the boys. What that did instead was it made a whole generation of young boys uninterested in reading, because instead of being able to read things that were of interest to them, that made them enjoy reading.
Tales of adventure, right? And excitement and danger and all those sorts of things.
I remember was Matt something was the name of the author. He wrote these young children's books about sports superstars.
Right.
And they were these fictional tales about where you read about a baseball player. I remember there was one called the Eephus pitch, and it was this story. You know what an Eephus pitch is? It's like an underhanded, it's like a sidearm throw that like loops way up in the air.
It's real slow.
Yes. It's almost like it's like a slow pitch softball pitch in baseball. I read books about learning about this baseball superstar who threw an Eephus pitch, but at least I enjoyed it because I was into baseball, right? And I got lucky that I had a mother who paid attention to these things and said, no, I don't like what you're being told to read in school.
Right.
You're going to read these books at home too, so you actually learn to start enjoying reading. Anyway, you have these scenarios where if you have a second grade teacher who's just going by the curriculum and just teaching whatever they're told, and they really don't care, that student then gets to third grade, you've lost that student. And you could have the most energetic, engaged teacher in the world in third grade, and that student's already lost. That student's already, I don't care. I don't want to hear about racism. I don't want to hear about white supremacy. I don't want to hear about transgender issues. It's not interesting to a 7-year-old. That's not interesting to an 8-year-old. They want to read about adventure and they want to hear about bugs and all of those things. And we've just gotten to this point where now all of this new curriculum, it's not just that year, and it's just totally disengaging students altogether. And so it stops being an honorable profession for anybody who even wants to do a good job, because they can't even get through to students anymore who want to.
Well, let me add an important caveat there. Within many ordinary traditional neighborhood public schools, where those good teachers can shine is if they leave those schools and go to alternative schools.
Right.
So there are some tremendous charter schools, right, that are blazing whole new paths in the realm of education. There are some very good private schools. Not all private schools are good. Some are really good, and those are the ones who what those schools have in common. When you look at the good ones, both private and charter, the one thing they have in common, they select teachers, they hire teachers based on subject matter mastery, not on what degrees they have, not on what licenses or credentials, right? But people who actually know the subject matter that they're going to be teaching. And they are, all of those schools that excel, that really do well, they reward the teachers who are really good, the teachers who put in the effort. They want their own classrooms to be better. They want their own classes. They want their school to be better. They help students be better. They help colleagues. They help fellow teachers be better. A good school will reward that kind of teacher and not reward the teacher who's just looking to get out of there as fast as they can.
Sure.
With doing the bare minimum.
Sure. And that kind of leads into back to your comment earlier about the college education, the college loans, the subsidization and all of that. And I have some real concerns about the way that the conservatives are talking about this. I understand the emotional argument of, I don't want to pay for your gender studies degree.
Right.
And if you didn't value your education enough to pay for it, why should I?
Right.
I think there's some flaws to that argument. And I think there's some flaws to that reasoning. While I agree, and I think it's emotionally probably the right argument for political purposes, if we want to get politicians elected, it's the right argument to say it's a waste of money and we shouldn't be spending money that way and you're passing it along. In the grand scheme, if Democrats weren't spending that money on waiving college tuition, they're going to spend the money on something else, and they're probably going to spend it anyway.
Right.
There is absolutely no concept among the Democratic progressive political class of we should stop spending other people's money. Right. I mean, at this point,
that is not a conversation they have.
Right.
In fact, let me add, it's hard to find Republicans who will engage in that conversation. Some do here and there, but that's a hard conversation to have within the political class.
Right. So they're going to do it anyway. And we're hearing some Democrats pushing back on Biden's executive order or whatever this was to start paying off this $10,000 student loan, debt forgiveness, whatever you want to call it. They're pushing back saying we could use that money to go pay for free pre-K for 3 and 4 year olds nationally across. It's not going to stop them. They're still going to go push for that same thing.
Sure.
And just because he did this, they're still going to push for that. And Democrats are still going to vote for that. So it's not like it was one or the other to them and like they're making it out to be.
Well, and let me just add to that something we've mentioned before. One of the things that the progressive political class never does is once they create some new program, some new spending program, it doesn't matter what it is. What they never do is years later revisit that program and say, number one, did it achieve its goals? Can we get rid of it now?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it utterly failing, which might be a reason to get rid of it, right? They never go back and reevaluate these things. It's like once something, a spending program gets put in place, the assumption is then that has to be there always and forever. We can never, the only thing we can ever do is increase the funding for that program. And then other things they want to spend money on, it's always additional spending. It's never, let's cut back spending on this thing that's not working so that we can spend money on this other thing. It's never that. It's always, well, we need to increase total spending because we still have to fund all these old failing programs and we have to go fund student loan, forgiveness or pre-K or whatever the latest thing is going to be.
Right. So I want to talk about this gender studies argument, right? Because that's the go-to, right? Yep. You've seen everybody. I don't want to pay for your gender studies degree. I'm less concerned there in terms of, I think we've become, on the conservative side, we have become overly focused on what are you studying? And I say that with some hesitation because I know it's very easy to interpret that as, well, he doesn't care about any of it. I do. I want our students they should know how to read. They should know how to write. They should know how to do math at high levels, right? Americans in general, we have a strong enough society. We have a comfortable enough society. Our levels of poverty, the poorest people in our country are still living better than some of the wealthiest people in other places around the world. Yeah. So we should be at a point where people are learning to do the basics at a very high level. Mm-hmm. But we're so focused on the curriculum at this point that I think we're starting to lose sight a little bit of what is the rest of college about? What is the rest of high school about? Right. And we're pushing these charter schools and we're pushing homeschooling and we're pushing colleges or avoiding college, right? Maybe college isn't such a good thing or go to a community college because of the curriculum. But I think about how much I grew as a person from the time I was 15 to the time I was 22 or 14 to 22 when I was in high school through college. Right. And the experiences therein and how important those were to my life. And I am a little bit worried about we are becoming so focused on getting away from just pulling kids out of that curriculum as opposed to trying to figure out how do we fix the school systems. I worry about the charter schools where you have very limited athletic departments, right? Most of the charter schools don't have athletic departments. A school like Hillsdale, where you taught, where I strongly believe in the curriculum that's being taught, those kids aren't getting going to big football games or going to the big college experiences that really help shape us.
Hillsdale College has a football team.
They do.
The Chargers.
And they get what? a couple hundred fans showing up to a game. And it's smaller than my high school.
Yeah.
Right. And I just worry we need, as a community, we need to figure out how do we start providing both and not thinking, okay, because the left has destroyed our college systems through progressive ideology and everything else, because they've destroyed public schools, we've become so focused on curriculum and we want to talk about gender studies and this and that why don't we start talking about value? And why don't we start talking about getting the real solutions? To me are, one, I think we all agree on this. You got to get government out of the loan business. First and foremost, right? Governments have to stop guaranteeing loans. I was in grad school when Obama led the charge to have government first start guaranteeing loans and eventually start offering federal student loans. My tuition, I had worked my way into an in-state tuition in graduate school. My tuition went from $120 a credit to $720 a credit a semester. So just on that alone, get government out.
Let's make that connection to make sure people understand that. Here are a couple of basic truths that are, these are timeless economic truths. They're truths woven into human nature. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in, what language people speak, what they look like. None of that matters. Here are the truths. When you tax something, you get less of it because you're raising the price artificially on it. When you subsidize a thing, you get more of it. So, for example, if you want to give money to poor people, you're subsidizing poverty. The result is going to be more poverty. Right. More people will. What that means in practice is some people who are close to being poor will look and say, "Man, I can almost qualify for that subsidy. I will figure out a way so that I get into that category of poverty so that I get that subsidy."
Right.
And so what happens is after, a short period of time, the number of poor people has gone up because more people are looking for the subsidy. If you subsidize expensive college tuitions, you get more expensive college tuitions because here's a college, right? And a college has a budget. They have their expenses, they have their sources of revenue, and they're sitting there doing their financial calculations, right? To run the college as a business, pay all their bills. And all of a sudden along comes the government. It says, here's a bunch of money we'll guarantee is going to come to your college. And they immediately think, well, this is great. We can charge more for tuition because more people are going to have access to more money that is earmarked for us.
It's worse than that. You have to get more students paying more money for them to get the government saying, here, if you charge more and you get more students coming to your school, we will give you more money, right? It's the same thing as what we see in primary and secondary.
If I'm a college, right? I'm a college, you're a college student. If I'm the college and I say tuition is $10,000 a year, you might be able to pay that. Right. And you might pay it. But if I say tuition is $80,000 a year, you might say, I can't afford that. I need a loan. Anybody around here loan me a whole bunch of money, and there's the government saying, "Yeah, we'll loan you the money."
Right. So the school knows we can charge more because the government's going to make sure we get paid, whether the government ever gets paid back or not. The school doesn't care. The school just wants to make sure it gets paid by the student. So in my case, they sat there and they did the calculations. Right. If I was paying $120 per credit per semester. I was taking about 15 credits a semester. It comes out to about $1,500, $2,000 a semester. That was reasonable tuition, right? All of a sudden now you go up to $720 a credit. That's 6 to 7 times the amount that was there. All of a sudden, my $2,000 a semester for in-state tuition to a public school went from $2,000 a semester to $12,000 a semester. And I had to go borrow that money from the government. The school didn't care where I was getting the money from. They were still getting it.
But by the way, several economics think tanks and groups have put together graphs. It's easy to find if you Google graphs or charts of not inflation, just prices of various goods and services over the last 20 to 30 years. And some of these charts are really revealing. What it shows is those products and services that have been heavily subsidized, the price, it's a straight line up year by year by year. And at the top of all of them, college tuition, healthcare, right there alongside it. When you have lots of government subsidies, the price goes up exponentially. Get into realms of things that are not subsidized much, in fact, not regulated much either. TVs.
TV is the best example.
And the price of TVs has actually gone down,
right,
while the quality has gone way up. Our TVs today are, 1,000 times better than what they were a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades ago.
Every year they make massive strides in the quality of TVs.
Right.
Like every year when the Consumer Electronics Show comes out, we see these amazing new TVs and they're like the same price as what we paid last year for a product that was significantly worse.
And these things are connected. Suppose, I had set up this example before where I was a college and you were a student. Suppose I'm a college and you're a college. We have different colleges. And there are students out here, they don't have any subsidies. There are no subsidies. So number one, you and I are going to run our colleges as efficiently as we can because we want to try to get our tuition rates down low because we want students to be able to come. And when students are looking at my college and looking at your college and looking at other colleges and they got to pay for it themselves, they're really going to care about the quality of the college.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, right, I'm incentivized as a college, you're incentivized, other colleges are incentivized to provide the highest quality educational experience, student experience, whatever that means, whatever the value is in the eye of the beholder, of the student, whatever they value, to offer that kind of value. Once government comes into the picture and says, we'll subsidize, we will pay for that student's tuition. Now, all of a sudden, my incentive as a college is not offering the best educational value, and this is true of any kind of business. It's how do I get more of those government dollars coming to me?
Right, which is what college has become, and that's why they teach the things that the progressive bureaucrats want them to teach because they know that's what's going to help funnel more money and get more people voting for those progressives who are going to expand the federal bureaucracy and keep funneling more and more money, and we're going to keep this money laundering scheme going.
I want to add one more piece to this.
Please
do. This has been my world for a long time. This world of higher education, and it's so complex. You're absolutely right. When you have a bureaucratic regime, kind of centered around a federal Department of Education, they're the ones who distribute all the Pell Grants and the federal student loans and the GI Bills and all these things go through the Department of Education. You bet these colleges are looking at those progressive bureaucrats and they're going to offer curricula and majors and instruction that those bureaucrats want to see offered, and it gets even worse. There's this part of the world of higher education that very few people understand, very few people talk about. It's the world of accreditation.
Right.
So there's only a few big national accrediting agencies. If you're running a college, you want to be accredited. If you're not accredited, you're seen as not intellectually serious, not academically rigorous. So these accreditation agencies will come and they'll offer an accreditation for various periods of sometimes it's 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, and it has to be renewed. Like it's not forever. They're going to return to your college and they're going to see, how do you run your college financially? How do you run your college academically? Like what kind of degrees do your professors have? And all those sorts of things. And those accrediting agencies, this was an invention of, hold your breath, guess who invented it? Progressives invented the accreditation agencies, and they're staffed with progressives.
Right.
And when they show up to your campus, part of what you have to do is demonstrate that you are sufficiently progressive. They're going to want to know, they're going to want to interview your diversity officers, your diversity counselors, and your equity and inclusion vice presidents, right? And all that kind of stuff. You have to have that if you want to be accredited. Now, the federal Department of Education, which is part of the government, they're sitting there with all these subsidies, and they're saying, we'll only send subsidies to your school if you're accredited. And so this is what's really putting teeth in these schools want to design their curricula to appease the progressives in the accreditation agencies, the progressives in the Department of Education, as well as the rest of the government through which all this funding comes from.
Right.
And it's also why it makes this one tough nut to crack.
Right.
If you actually want to try to get in and shake up the world of education, it ultimately, what it would really mean, Dave, it would mean venturing out and trying to start some colleges and universities that receive no federal funding at all and don't care about accreditation.
Right.
Ignore the whole world and so just say, here's our school, here's what we have to offer, and try to make it something that people value and would be willing to pay for and come and attend.
Well, so that's kind of the point I was driving to. And it starts with, if you're going to do something like that, I want people to really think about what that means, because I think we talk a lot, like and I don't mean you and I as we, I mean the collective we, the conservative, the we's who are angry at our current education system.
Right.
We talk a lot, but do you really realize what that means to start something like that? A school cannot operate without an endowment. It is absolutely not possible to start a college and start getting students to come without somebody coming in first and saying, you know what? I want to help you make this happen. So you can go buy land, you can build buildings and classrooms and hire teachers and develop curriculum and all of the things that have to happen to attract a student to come to the school.
One of the big questions a student is going to ask, especially for a new school, they're going to want to know, well, if I start next semester, is this school going to be here 4 years from now? Right. So that I can actually graduate. And your point is the endowment helps to ensure some longevity to the school. They're not teetering on financial ruin, right? Week to week, month to month, semester to semester.
So are people in our community actually willing to step up and say, okay, we're going to make sure that these things happen? And then this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning and the bigger point I was trying to make. It goes beyond. You can't just say, we're going to be unaccredited. We hope you're okay with that. And we're going to offer, we're not going to offer a progressive education. If that was the case, Hillsdale would be booming with students. Hillsdale would be getting millions of applications from all of these conservative families out there. And I know Hillsdale's accredited, but Hillsdale does avoid federal funding and it is not necessarily your typical progressive education or college education.
Right.
What Hillsdale lacks is they built it in an area that was cheap to build, right? Land wasn't hugely expensive in northern Michigan.
And there's a reason for that.
Right. it's not Arizona State.
Right.
Right. We need to remember that these are still kids. They still want to go to college and have a great college experience. And there is some growth that happens personally and socially throughout that experience. I mean, you think about how your life changed when you went from Hays, Kansas undergrad to graduate school in Los Angeles and how you grew as a person during that period. And I think about the same thing. I'm concerned that we are becoming more concerned about, are we teaching progressive education, and how do we stop teaching progressive education, and how do we start getting into this classical education, and how do we start focusing on all of these things? And we're forgetting this other piece, that you have to attract a kid to go to the school. And that's done through Greek systems and social systems and the town that the college is in and the athletic department and all of these things that make a college actually appeal.
So let me ask you a question. To what extent, it sounds like part of what you're saying here is that this is largely a question of size. It seems part of what I think I hear you saying, I'm curious to hear your response, is that the bigger schools, like big state schools, not because they're state, just because they're big, that these big schools offer certain things that are important, that are valuable, that can't be found at smaller schools. Is this part of your
I don't know that it's
exclusively
smaller schools, but what we do see, there's a reason those bigger state schools are bigger, right? There's a reason that more people go to CU Boulder than go to the University of Denver. It's just one of those things that it was, until a handful of years ago, it was cheaper to live in Boulder. It was cheaper to go to school in Boulder. You had more activities. DU doesn't have a football team. It doesn't have some of that social. Now, Now, University of Denver has made massive strides over the last handful of years.
Mhm.
They've found ways to offer that. The areas around the school have gotten a lot better in terms of, over the last 20, 25 years, a lot better in terms of social aspects. They've built an athletic department based around hockey and lacrosse and soccer that is unmatched.
Mhm.
So now students have some of that thing. But for years, I mean, when I was a kid, DU wasn't even a consideration. If you were going to stay in town, you were going to go to Boulder, where it was cheaper to go.
Right.
And there was this great college experience. I guess my bigger point is, and I guess on that note, one more thing is, you do see a lot of the smaller schools, and I think Boston is the perfect example of this. The smaller schools start popping up nearby bigger schools,
Mhm.
where you can socialize at some of the bigger
Right.
schools or integrate with some of the bigger schools. You see this in a lot of places in California. You see this in
Well, and I was going to say, I mean,
Boston.
this is just a part of this whole landscape we're laying out, but it is a part. You know, the sheer geography is so different, and demographics in the older eastern part of the United States versus the central and western part of the United States. I mean, one of the benefits they have on the East Coast is big population centers are just packed, right? Crammed together. And so in a very small area, like a Boston, Massachusetts, you're going to find multiple
Right.
colleges and universities of various sizes, some gigantic and some small and some in between, within blocks of each other.
right.
And so, you know, they're going to the same restaurants and the same bars, right? In the same kind of social scene. As you move to the middle part of the country, right, that becomes more difficult because people are more spread out.
It doesn't. I mean, I look at, we know I spent some time in Cincinnati this summer.
Yeah.
You have University of Cincinnati, big state school, right?
Yeah.
Right down the street is Xavier,
Yeah.
small little private school. Those students interact, those students socialize. It's the same thing. In Nashville, there were like 7 colleges
Yeah.
in the Nashville area. You had Vanderbilt, you had Middle Tennessee State, you had Lipscomb.
Mm-hmm.
You had a lot of these different schools. I guess my bigger point, though, is I know we are so worried about what our kids are being taught that I don't want us to lose sight of part of that growth experience is not just what happens in the classroom. And we have become very anxious to start pulling our kids out of society, out of the progressive society, as opposed to actively getting involved. And to the people who go run for school board and try to fix the public schools or whatever else, can you fix public schools? Probably not. They're government run. There's bad incentives. But when you're starting to do these homeschool pods, when you're starting to do these charter schools, don't lose sight of the other aspects. And when you start telling your kids, hey, I'm not letting my kids go to college. I've actually heard conservatives say, my kids are not going to go to college. I will not let them. Never mind if a kid wants to go take his or her own loan out and go deal with it on their own, let them. But to say I'm not going to let my kid do this, you're think we're getting a little bit too in our own hole of saying we're going to take away this really important aspect of the growth that we go through during that experience. And I think the other part of this is, as we're starting to do this, when we see government, if we can get government out of the loan business,
Mm-hmm.
like we talked about, you're going to start to see colleges they're going to have no choice but to figure out, okay, should we be charging the same amount for every degree? If we're giving the loan, if the college is actually giving the loan, should we charge the same amount, it's one of the things that I never understood about college. Why is every single degree the same tuition?
And every credit hour.
Right.
Every credit hour is the same. Many people have suggested this. This is not original to me in any way. But just imagine, as a thought experiment, how things would change with this one simple thing. What if the colleges had to co-sign the loan? And so if a student, graduates and can't pay back the loan, the lenders come into the college.
Mm-hmm.
You co-sign, pay up. All of a sudden, those colleges and universities would really think about, do we want to co-sign this loan? This person's majoring in petroleum engineering, and those those graduates tend to start out with jobs over $100,000 upon graduation. We're pretty confident in co-signing that loan. Here's someone else majoring in gender studies.
Right.
We don't even know if they're going to be able to get a job.
Right.
Do we really want to co-sign this loan?
And you're also going to start to see them. I think they're going to also need to start figuring out, how do we produce students who can function in the world? Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, that was such a big part of college to me, was learning how to function in a world on my own.
Right.
And watching, I don't know if I've ever told this story, and we don't have a ton of time, but I had a roommate my freshman year of college. He didn't survive CU. Ends up graduating from Stanford, by the way, because his grandfather.
I was just going to say, did he live? When you say he didn't survive CU.
He got thrown out of CU.
Okay.
His better of his 2 semesters, he got a 0.6 GPA.
That's like something off of
Never went to class.
Animal House.
Played video games all night, slept all day. But half of Stanford's campus is named after his grandfather, including the medical school.
Oh.
He moved back in with his parents and he graduated from Stanford because they couldn't say no to him. Right. But I watched what somebody who had been given everything he'd ever wanted growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, family had a lot of money, obviously, and had been given everything he ever wanted. First week of school, he maxed out 9 of his parents' credit cards.
Yeah.
This is a guy who wasn't capable of living on his own.
No, he was coddled and irresponsible.
Right.
Yeah.
And I got to experience that. I got to watch what that looks like. And I think if we did do what you're suggesting, and we put making colleges co-sign on these loans, they're not just going to look at the majors, and they're not just going to look at what degree is important here.
Right.
They're also going to start producing students who actually can survive in the world on a day-to-day basis. And that's almost, to me, more important than the degree that they're taking.
Right.
I would be fine if a college made a really good effort to produce somebody who understood how to reason well, how to think well, and how to be productive. If they want to go study gender studies, but they can come out of college and say, hey, I have a worthless degree, but I learned how to think well, reason well, and be productive. Okay, that college can feel probably pretty confident that student's going to figure out a way to pay his loans back.
That would be infusing modern colleges and universities with the spirit of Booker T. Washington. This was Booker T. Washington's whole theme. This is that period right after the Civil War. And he wants to see, but Booker T. Washington, for those who don't know, he was a black man, and he wanted to see newly freed Black Americans prosper and thrive. And he thought the worst thing that could happen is to become dependent on others. He wanted people to learn how to be independent, how to be self-reliant, to borrow one of our virtues here at the Vino Veritas Society. So he thought education should really revolve around practical skills of being able to get along in life, right? And live well independently. He wasn't opposed to theoretical speculation and those types of things, but he thought that's kind of worthless if you don't also teach someone how to earn some money and how to pay their bills and how to survive. You need to have both,
and how to be a productive member of their community.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that was what was so important. And I guess that's my bigger point here is I've watched the social media outrage over Joe Biden's new promise to wipe off debt. And I don't want to take on your debt. And I paid off mine. And why can't you pay off yours? They can't pay off theirs because the government got involved in those loans. I am part of that class, right? I graduated college. I went and worked for a handful of years.
Right.
I decided to go back to graduate school 7 years after I graduated college. When I started, I didn't go in thinking I was going to be taking on massive amounts of debt. I chose a school that gave me a major grant. They called it an in-state tuition waiver, as my scholarship, right? We're going to give you in-state tuition. So I picked that school instead of a school that was going to cost me $40,000 or $50,000 a semester. And then all of a sudden my loans went up. Was I going to leave school and not finish in the middle of a program? No. And now I'm sitting on a lot of student loans, and that happened to a lot of kids. And I think that is not necessarily, it's not as simple as, well, you just went and got a degree that has no value. We have schools that are producing kids who don't know how to go be productive.
Right.
And That's really where I want our community to start focusing their energy. Stop focusing on what was the degree and was it valuable to you and all of those things. It's not just that. It's are we creating students and are we creating an environment that's actually beneficial to a productive life?
Well, and it raises these questions. We should also add, I mean, there is this other just blatant political aspect to all this. I mean, behind all of this is just simple vote buying.
Right.
I mean,
this is
if you want to buy votes, what do? You go and offer to pay off people's loans, and they're very likely to vote for you in the future.
This is clearly continuing the trend of Joe Biden is the heir to FDR.
Very, very much so.
Right.
This is FDR-esque.
Right.
I mean, this is right out of the playbook of FDR, the New Deal. In fact, I'll give Biden credit here, and I mean credit as a good sort of Machiavellian New Dealing politician. You create programs that don't merely reward Democrats. More importantly, you buy off many Republicans too, so that they'll become Democrats, so that they'll start voting for you. And that's the way you ensure a long term. I mean, there's a reason, if people forget, the United States House of Representatives was controlled for over 4 decades continuously without interruption by Democrats after Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, because you have this big national network of programs that is effectively using taxpayer dollars and debt to buy votes,
right?
Not merely reward crony Democratic friends, but buy votes from people who otherwise might vote Republican, but now they feel that they want more of that free stuff, so they start voting Democrat. There's another piece to all of this also. When you really pull on that thread, at the heart of this idea of debt relief, you're gonna find the concept of a right to education. Mm-hmm. You're gonna bump into that idea at some point that people are entitled to education all the way through college, even graduate school. And if they can't pay for it, then they shouldn't have to pay for it. They're entitled to these things. The financial burden should go on someone else. But your bigger point that you're making is, I mean, it's absolutely right. Whatever their major is, whatever they're studying and emphasizing, if they were coming out of college well equipped to live, that would be one thing. It would actually be useful for us to have a national kind of conversation, an ongoing conversation. What exactly does it mean to be educated?
Right.
What should the end product be? If someone can't pay their own rent, can't do anything, they don't know how to feed themselves, does that qualify as educated or not?
Well, and I think to that point, being socially educated as part of my point here, right? Being socially educated, understanding there's going to be people who aren't nice to you. There's going to be people who say things that you don't like.
Right.
Being equipped to handle that, going through those experiences and learning how to handle yourself.
Don't we just cancel them, Dave?
That's the problem, right?
That's what they're learning in college. Someone says something you don't like, you just cancel them.
Right.
And that's not the real world.
And that's not the real world. And that's why now we've run into all of these issues and why we have so many unproductive people that require us to start to talk about it. We've got all these people who can't afford to do anything in their life because even if they are being productive, they've got so much student debt that they don't know how to handle.
I've often wondered this, just imagine if you go through school and you're one of those cancelers. This is what you're doing when you're 19, 20, 21. You're showing up at events with speakers. And if you don't like them, you're making a bunch of noise. You're disruptive. You're marching around with your signs, right, until the speaker leaves because they're scared of their own safety. That kind of ugliness. If that's your preparation for the world, and then you graduate and you go out, how are you even going to work at a business with other people? What's going to happen the first time a colleague says something you disagree with? You're going to march around and bang a pan and, threaten to beat everybody up who has some ideas different than yours?
Right. And that's where we're at. And that's why we have this just such a massive gulf between sides in this country, and this pending, what feels like this pending just battle that's just awaiting us down the road. And I worry about us saying, you know what, we're going to go build a separate society. We're going to go find other schools. We're going to go build other schools. We're going to say they're only welcome to people who think our way,
right.
Just like the progressives saying it's only welcome. We have to go back in. We have to engage. We have to have these conversations. You just said something
really important I want to highlight before we wrap up. The solution to progressive tribalism is not conservative tribalism.
Right.
Right. The solution to progressive tribalism in education is education that's well-rounded and that helps people learn how to be productive and responsible and independent, whatever else that they learn. That's the solution to it.
And there's a lot of people out there who say, well, we can't do that. It's impossible. And I'm going to tell you right now, we talk about every day. We talk about every single day how to fix that. The way to fix it is to fix the incentives. Mm-hmm. The bad incentives that are leading to the bad outcomes, the bad actions, the bad activities, Fix those incentives. And we do have the ability to start to try to fix the incentives.
Well, I would phrase it a little different. I wouldn't say fix the incentives, get rid of the bad and get rid of them.
Well,
because in many cases, it really is a matter of we've created the bad incentives by creating the subsidies and the regulations and the programs. All we really need to do is get rid of the subsidies and the regulations and the programs, and you eliminate many of those bad incentives.
You do. I guess the fix is that next step of let's make colleges responsible for the students that they're putting out. Yeah. If a student's taking out a loan, let's make a college co-sign on it. Let's make the college responsible. Things like that change the incentive altogether. And those colleges are going to seriously start to think twice about, should we really be doing this? Should we really be teaching this? Should we really be creating this program or eliminating this program? Is that really what's in the student's best interest in their life to be able to pay back their loans?
What you're saying here, Dave, is we really do have the answers for most of the big problems in the world if people just paid more attention. If they joined the Vino and Veritas Society and were listening to us more often, problem would be solved.
That's quite a statement, but it's not totally untrue.
Well, we're going to keep doing what we do, and our solutions, as good as they are, they really spring from the principles of the American founding. That's what we're all about here.
Those guys knew what they were doing. That's what will continue to guard those ideas.
Yep.
No somos custodes.